All right, get ready to journey back in time with me thousands of years to ancient Israel, because we are about to do a deep dive into a pretty fascinating part of the Bible, chapters 13 through 15 of Leviticus.
Some people might hear Leviticus and think, oh no, rules and regulations, but I think you'll find this deep dive pretty interesting.
It really is interesting because it's not dry at all. In a way, it's like peeking into this ancient rule book for life in ancient Israel, but instead of just boring lists of rules, we get all these insights into how they dealt with things like infections and what they would have called leprosy back then. You know, even how they thought about their bodies, stuff that's still relevant today.
Right, and these weren't just random rules. They were deeply connected to their beliefs. It was all about maintaining ritual purity to stay aligned with God.
So let's talk about that word unclean. We hear it now and think, oh, dirty, but it meant something totally different to them, right?
Yeah, totally different. It wasn't about hygiene in the way we think of it. It was about spiritual alignment, about being in a right relationship with God, and it wasn't a permanent state.
Okay, so more like hitting a reset button than like, being banished forever.
Exactly.
So they had this whole system for how to deal with uncleanliness.
Oh.
Like it talks about leprosy a lot, but that probably didn't always mean what we think of today, right?
You're right. It was more of an umbrella term back then. They didn't have the same medical knowledge, so leprosy covered a whole bunch of skin conditions. It was anything from rashes to sores to even changes in their hair.
And they had priests who basically acted like ancient doctors, right?
Right.
Like examining people to see what was going on.
That's a great way to think about it. They were meticulously observing and recording symptoms, which is actually pretty advanced when you think about it.
It really is. And this is where it gets super interesting because without microscopes or anything, they stumbled onto a practice that we still consider essential today. They had quarantine.
It's incredible, right? Even back then, they understood that separating people could prevent the spread of disease. If someone showed signs of infection, boom, isolated for 7 days, sometimes even longer. They were really onto something.
Which makes total sense when you think about it, right? I mean, that instinct to protect the community from illness, it's got to be pretty deeply rooted in us.
Sure. And that brings us to their cleansing rituals, which could get, well, kind of complicated.
Yeah, we're not talking about a quick pump of hand sanitizer here. More like birds, blood, cedar wood, the whole. What was the deal with all that?
It all had symbolic meaning for them. Imagine your house being suspected of contamination. Today, we'd think cleaning products, but back then it was birds, cedar wood, hyssop, a scarlet string.
A scarlet string. Okay, now I'm really curious. What was that all about?
Well, unfortunately, the text doesn't really get into the specifics of every element, but that's part of what makes studying these ancient rituals so interesting. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle, figuring out the meaning behind each piece.
Right. And it wasn't always enough to just do these symbolic purifications, was it? Sometimes they had to take things up a notch.
Definitely. Like if a problem kept coming back, they might even tear down the entire house. That's pretty extreme, right? But for them, it shows how seriously they took contamination. It wasn't just about the house itself. It was about protecting the whole community.
It's almost like that drastic action destroying a house.
Mm-hmm.
It served as a powerful reminder to everyone about how important their communal health was. It makes you think about how differently they viewed contamination and community safety compared to us today.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that for them, it wasn't just about the physical aspect of cleanliness. These rituals were deeply spiritual. They were about maintaining a right relationship with God and each other, which, for them, was crucial for a healthy and thriving community.
It's amazing how interconnected everything was for them back then.
Yeah.
Their health, their community, even their understanding of God.
Absolutely. For instance, if someone had a skin condition, we'd probably just think about treating it with medicine. But for them, the focus was just as much on the ritual cleansing, on publicly marking that transition back to a state of purity.
Which takes us back to that word unclean. It's so easy to misinterpret, right? To think it's about being dirty or even morally bad.
Right. But that wasn't it at all. Being ritually unclean was more like a spiritual misalignment, something that needed to be addressed, a temporary state.
Kind of like needing to hit the reset button.
Exactly. And these rituals, they weren't just something you did by yourself in a corner. They were very much a community affair. After the waiting period and the cleansing rituals, that person was welcomed back, often with an even stronger sense of belonging.
That's beautiful, actually. It wasn't about being permanently excluded, but about a process of healing and coming back together.
And it really underscores how important community was in their faith. These laws and rituals, they might seem strange to us now, but they were all about maintaining the well-being of the whole group, not just individuals.
Makes you wonder if, in some ways, we've lost sight of that a little bit. Like, we don't have these elaborate rituals anymore, but we still have our own ways of acknowledging when someone's sick or struggling. Yeah.
Absolutely. We send get well cards, try to avoid contact when we're under the weather, things like that. Those are like our modern rituals of care and empathy.
It's like, even though these ancient practices seem so different from our lives today, they still show how much we all need connection and belonging.
It's so true, and it just goes to show how powerful rituals can be. Even now, we look for things that can help us make sense of difficult experiences, something to offer comfort, and something that brings us all together.
Totally. And those rituals, whether they're from thousands of years ago or things we do now, are like saying, hey, we're all in this together. And that takes us right back to the core message of Leviticus, doesn't it? It's about so much more than just a bunch of rules. It was a way to keep the community healthy and thriving physically and spiritually.
Absolutely. And even though we might not consult Leviticus for medical advice these days, it's a good reminder that our well-being is about more than just our physical health. Our social and spiritual lives matter too. It's a very holistic perspective, and honestly, I think it's something we could use a little more of in our modern world.
It really makes you wonder, what people will think about our ideas about health and hygiene thousands of years in the future. Like, maybe someone will find an old bottle of hand sanitizer and be totally baffled by it.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's a good reminder that we're always learning new things and our understanding of the world is always changing.
That's a great point. So next time you come across something that seems kind of strange, whether it's a custom or a belief, think back to this deep dive on Leviticus. There's usually a much deeper story there if you look for it. A story about what connects us all and our desire for meaning and belonging. And hey, who knows, maybe it'll even spark some interesting conversations.
I ended the episode in a way that felt appropriate for the existing conversational flow. I avoided explicit end-of-episode language to maintain the natural feel.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.